Imagine a moment where every electrically powered object ceases to function. What would our world look like? Take a moment to visualize this scenario. A world in which the electricity that powers our daily lives suddenly and completely disappears. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? In our modern world, electricity is as vital to us as the air we breathe. It lights up our homes, powers our industries, keeps our hospitals running, and connects us to the rest of the world. It has become so ingrained in our daily lives that we barely give it a second thought until it's gone. Let's consider a power outage. This is not just a simple flicker of the lights or a brief interruption to your favorite TV show. We're talking about a total, all-encompassing blackout. This can be caused by a myriad of reasons, such as faults at power stations, damage to transmission lines, short circuits, or even a power grid overload. Now imagine this power outage not just affecting your home, but the entire world. The sudden loss of electrical power to every end user on the planet. Sounds like something out of a dystopian novel, doesn't it? But in our increasingly interconnected and electrified world, it's a scenario that we need to consider. The impact would be immediate and far-reaching. Hospitals would lose their life-saving equipment. Sewage treatment plants would cease operation, leading to a potential public health crisis. The world's communication networks would go dark, leaving us isolated and cut off. Not to mention the immediate danger posed by nuclear power plants. Without electricity to cool the reactors, we could be facing a series of nuclear meltdowns, each one potentially more devastating than the last. The world as we know it would be plunged into darkness, both literally and figuratively. It's a frightening thought, but by understanding the risks, we can prepare for the unthinkable. In this video, delve into the chilling consequences of a world plunged into darkness. In a blink, our lines of communication would be cut off. Picture this, the humming electronic devices that keep us connected to the world suddenly silent. The internet, that vast digital network binding humanity together, would go dark. Cell phones, those tiny pocket-sized portals to the world, would become little more than paperweights. Broadcasting services, the stalwarts of communication, would cease their transmissions. Radios would crackle with static, television screens would flash into oblivion, and the airwaves would be eerily silent. The loss of these technologies would be more than just an inconvenience. It would be a seismic shift in the way we live and interact. Consider the impact on our daily lives. No more quick texts to friends, no more scrolling through social media feeds, no more checking emails on the go. The rhythm of our lives, so attuned to the constant flow of information, would be disrupted, leaving us feeling disoriented and cut off. Now let's think bigger. Without electricity, the complex networks that facilitate global communication would unravel. International phone calls would be impossible, severing ties between nations. The World Wide Web, that digital tapestry of interconnected information, would fray and disintegrate, leaving us in a state of global isolation. Communities too would feel the sting of this isolation. Emergency services would struggle to coordinate without their communication networks. Families separated by distance would lose their means of staying in touch. Neighbors would become strangers as the shared experiences facilitated by media would vanish. On an individual level, the impact would be deeply personal. We would be cut off from the world, left to navigate our surroundings without the guiding light of information. The isolation would be profound, a stark reminder of our reliance on the invisible threads of communication that bind us together. Our world, so intricately connected, would suddenly become a series of isolated islands. The loss of electricity would not just plunge us into darkness, it would silence the hum of communication, leaving us alone in a world that suddenly feels very, very large. As the lights go out, so would our essential services. Imagine hospitals, those bastions of life-saving technology, plunged into darkness. Power outages are critical at sites like these. From the humming life support machines to the beeping monitors tracking vital signs, almost every piece of equipment in a modern hospital relies on electricity. Now consider the consequences of a prolonged blackout. Backup generators may kick in, but they'll only last as long as their fuel supplies. Once those are depleted, the life-saving machines go silent. Then there's the matter of preserving medicines and vaccines, many of which require refrigeration. Without power, these crucial elements of our healthcare system would spoil, rendering them useless. Moving beyond the hospitals, consider our sewage treatment plants. These facilities heavily rely on electricity to treat and dispose of waste safely. In a world without electricity, these plants would cease to function, leading to the potential for outbreaks of disease as untreated waste enters our waterways. Speaking of water, our supply systems also depend on electricity. We need power to pump water from treatment plants to our homes. Without it, access to clean water becomes a critical issue. The risk of dehydration, poor sanitation, and waterborne diseases would skyrocket. And let's not forget about heating and cooling systems in our homes and workplaces. Without electricity, these systems fail, leaving us vulnerable to extreme temperatures. In colder climates, this could lead to hypothermia, while in hotter regions, heat stroke becomes a real threat. The knock-on effects of a prolonged power outage on our essential services are staggering. Hospitals unable to function effectively, sewage and water treatment plants grinding to a halt, homes and workplaces exposed to the elements. The health risks and potential disasters that could follow are immense. Indeed, a world without electricity wouldn't just be a world without lights or internet. It would be a world grappling with a healthcare crisis. Our refrigerators would become useless boxes, our heaters cold metal shells. That's the stark reality we'd face if we were to suddenly lose electricity. It's easy to forget that most of our modern conveniences are powered by the humble electron's journey, until that journey is abruptly halted. Take a moment to consider the appliances that fill our homes. The refrigerator, the oven, the washing machine, the electric kettle, the vacuum cleaner, the television, the list goes on. Each one of these devices, which we so often take for granted, relies on a steady flow of electricity to perform their tasks. Without power, they become little more than ornamental pieces of metal and plastic. But it's more than just convenience that we'd lose. Consider the refrigerator, a staple in most homes. Without electricity, it becomes an insulated box, incapable of keeping our food fresh. The days of popping to the supermarket for a week's worth of groceries would be over. Instead, we'd be forced to return to the age-old methods of food preservation, salting, smoking, pickling. No more fresh milk, no more frozen peas, no more chilled drinks on a hot day. And then there's heating. Without electricity, our homes would rapidly cool in winter, turning our cozy nests into icy caves. We'd be forced to resort to fireplaces and wood-burning stoves, assuming we have them and assuming we have wood to burn. And let's not forget about those sweltering summer months. Without air conditioning or electric fans, our homes would become stifling, unbearable. Even simple tasks like washing clothes or dishes would become laborious chores without the aid of our electric appliances. The electric water heater would turn into a cold, dormant beast, relegating us to cold showers and baths. Our homes, once our comfort zones, would be reduced to primitive shelters. It's a chilling thought, isn't it? But it's a potential reality if we were to lose our electrical power. And it's a reminder of just how much we rely on this invisible force that powers our modern lives. Our economies, so reliant on the electric pulse, would flatline. Imagine a world where every industry grinds to a halt, where businesses are shuttered and financial institutions crumble. It's a grim picture, but it's the reality of an economic meltdown in a world without electricity. Without power, our factories would cease operations. Production lines that once hummed with activity, churning out everything from cars to computers, would stand eerily silent. Millions of workers would suddenly find themselves without jobs, and the ripple effect on the economy would be catastrophic. And it's not just manufacturing that would be hit. Think about the services sector. With no electricity to power their operations, hotels, restaurants, and entertainment venues would struggle to stay open. The tourism industry would crumble as travel grinds to a halt, and with no internet or electronic communication, online businesses would disappear overnight. What about agriculture? Without power, irrigation systems would fail, and with no refrigeration or transport, fresh produce wouldn't make it to market. Food shortages would become the norm, causing prices to skyrocket, and leaving many unable to afford basic necessities. Let's not forget the financial institutions. Banks, stock markets, insurance companies, they'd all be crippled without electricity. The complex web of electronic transactions and global finance that underpins our economy would unravel. The potential for a global economic crisis would be very real. In this bleak scenario, money as we know it may lose its value. With no electronic banking or ATMs, cash would be king, but only until supplies run out. And with a collapsed economy, what value would paper money hold? We might see a return to barter systems where goods and services are exchanged directly. In a world without electricity, financial prosperity would become a memory of the past. And then there are the silent, ticking time bombs, our nuclear power plants. These are not just sources of immense power, but also harbingers of potential disaster. The sudden loss of electricity would strip these facilities of their cooling power, setting the stage for a catastrophe of unthinkable proportions. Let's delve deeper into this grim potentiality. Nuclear power plants require a constant supply of electricity to cool the reactor core and spent fuel pools. In the absence of this critical power, the heat from the radioactive decay would begin to rise uncontrollably. Without a cooling system in place, temperatures would escalate rapidly. The reactor's core and the spent fuel pools would begin to boil away the cooling water. Once the water is gone, the fuel rods would overheat, leading to a core meltdown. And it's not just one reactor we're talking about. There are hundreds of nuclear power plants scattered around the world. Each could become a ticking time bomb, threatening to unleash a nuclear disaster on an unprecedented scale. The consequences of such a meltdown would be catastrophic. Radioactive materials would be released into the environment, contaminating air, water, and soil. The immediate vicinity would become uninhabitable, perhaps for centuries. The impact wouldn't just be local. Radioactive particles could be carried by wind and rain to far-off places, affecting ecosystems, wildlife, and human populations worldwide. The fallout from these nuclear meltdowns could potentially lead to an increase in cancer rates, birth defects, and other health problems. The environmental damage would be immense, with entire species of plants and animals at risk of extinction. In this dark scenario, even our best efforts to contain the fallout would be severely hampered. With no electricity, our ability to respond to such a disaster would be drastically limited. There would be no power to run the machinery needed for cleanup, no communication networks to coordinate efforts, and no transportation systems to evacuate people or deliver supplies. A world without electricity could face an unprecedented nuclear catastrophe. In the wake of our electric demise, we'd be left with a world unrecognizable. The ramifications of an electricity-less world would be catastrophic, to say the least. It's not just the absence of light or the inability to charge our smartphones. It's the collapse of our modern society as we know it. Our communication networks, our hospitals, our transport systems, our economies, and even our nuclear facilities, all would be crippled without the lifeblood of electricity. Let's recap the key points. Communication, the lifeblood of our interconnected society, would be rendered virtually non-existent. The internet, our global platform for sharing information, would fall silent. Satellite communication would also be hampered, cutting off our ability to communicate over long distances. Essential services, such as water treatment and healthcare, would be severely compromised. Hospitals dependent on electricity for life-saving treatments and surgeries would be left in disarray. Water treatment plants would be unable to operate, leading to severe public health crises. Our daily conveniences, from refrigeration to air conditioning, would be a thing of the past. The food supply chain would collapse without refrigeration, leading to widespread food scarcity. The lack of heating or cooling systems would expose us to the harsh realities of the elements. Our economy would also take a massive hit. Without electricity to power factories, offices, and retail stores, businesses would shut down, unemployment would skyrocket, and the economy would be in freefall. And perhaps most terrifying of all, nuclear facilities would be left without cooling power, leading to potential meltdowns and widespread radiation. In the aftermath of such a catastrophe, we'd be left to pick up the pieces of a shattered civilization. Our dependency on electricity has shaped our world, our societies, and our lives in ways we often take for granted. Our world, once illuminated by the electric light, would be plunged into an era of darkness.